a nursery specializing in bromeliads, tillandsias, and orchids. Her passion for plants has taken her throughout the Americas, and I think she's just come back from Buenos Aires, where she lectured. And she also has discovered new species and created hundreds of hybrids. Today, Pamela will be sharing her insights on how to successfully grow orchids at home, which we all need help there. She'll introduce us to the incredible diversity of the orchid family, show some beautiful examples, and offer practical care and cultural tips that even beginners will use to enjoy these fascinating plants. Also to let you know, there'll be question and answers, Q&A will follow the lecture. And as you see, there are some index cards and pens on the table. And I think we ran out of index cards. So if you are at a table that just has napkins, write your question on the napkin. Mother Susan will pick them up and, we'll address them. And also don't rush out quickly, because at the end of all of this, there's going to be 4 surprises. So hang around. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Pamela Hyatt.
We have to turn it on. Okay. Okay. Is it? Okay. Can everyone hear me? I need to be a little bit closer, or and I just move it closer to me. How's that? Can you hear me now? Okay. Della, thank you very much. And I would like to thank you for inviting me to your parish church here to present this talk to all of you on orchids and tillandsia air plants. So I hope that today I can give you a little introduction of what orchids are, what tillandsias are, how to recognize them, how to care for them, so you're not so afraid of taking care of your plants, and be able to recognize what you need to do to hopefully get them to rebloom and enjoy orchids like many people do around the world. So the orchid family is the second largest family in the plant world. There are approximately 30,000 species and hundreds of thousands of hybrids. So you can imagine, with that many different types and varieties of plants, how are you expected to learn how to take care of them and grow that many different types? You can see the different types of flowers and shapes. There's just so many, you can't show them all in one presentation. Orchids are found growing on every single continent in the world except Antarctica. And they range in geography from the deserts to tropical forests to alpine regions. And because of those different growing environments, they're classified into 3 different categories. You have cool growers, which come from higher elevations, intermediate growers, which come from a normal intermediate range, and then warm growers, which you would find in deserts and drier areas. And so if you start to think about the plants as that helps you learn how to take care of them. Although most of the orchids that you have that are in cultivation, most of those come from tropical or subtropical areas that range from sea level to 7,000 feet. And most of the orchids that are available in your local nurseries or grocery stores, you should be able to take care of in your own home here in Southern California. And the hotspot for diversity of orchids is Colombia and Ecuador, where there's over 4,000 species in each country. So that's a big range and big diversity. Orchids are also one of the oldest plants. They've been around for 150 million years. There are some that documented that were here when the dinosaurs were here. So they've been around a long time, which means that they've changed and been able to diversify and adapt to all of their environments in order to survive. About 30% of the orchids are terrestrial, which means they grow in the ground and they use the soil to get their nourishment. The other 70% are epiphytic. Epiphytic plants grow on something else. Most of them will grow on trees. Some of them will grow on rocks. And they use their roots to hang on to the tree and they will absorb some of their nutrition through their root surfaces, but it's usually from moisture or nutrients that they're getting out of the atmosphere. They're not parasitic. Some people might think that they're parasites, but they're not. They don't usually harm their host tree. And for this reason that they're epiphytic, they're often called air plants. So orchids are called air plants as well as tillandsias. And after we finish the orchids, we'll talk about the tillandsia air plants, and I'll explain to you the difference between the two. But you can also see that because they're epiphytic and growing up on the trees and in the canopy, they're also exposed to filtered indirect light. They'll get dappled sunlight throughout the day, but they also get a lot of air movement. And air is really, really important for growing a successful orchid. Here's some examples of epiphytic orchids growing on rocks and trees. So this one over here is actually growing on rocks. These here are growing on trees, and these are growing in a drier, warmer environment. And the reason I know that is because they have pseudobulbs, which allow them to hold on to moisture and nutrition to give it to the plant. They also have thicker succulent or leathery foliage and leaves, and those are all things that they've adapted for the harsher climate. Here we have some more orchids, and these don't have the pseudobulbs that we saw on the other plants. So this means that they're probably growing in an environment where there's plenty of water available to them. A lot of these might be cloud forest plants where every day in the afternoon the thick fog comes in and the plants are drenched in moisture. So they don't have to store the moisture because it's readily available for them in their environment. So when you look at your plants, if you've got a big pseudobulb, that plant can probably go a little longer without water. If you don't have a big pseudobulb and you have skinny little roots, that plant is going to need more water and more frequent waterings. And then just here on the top, this is a phalaenopsis, and this is how they naturally grow on the sides of trees. They don't grow in pots like we get them from the store. But that makes them easier to display and take home and enjoy is when they're in a pot. So the diversity of the flowers with 30,000 members species and hundreds of thousands of hybrids, you just can't keep track of the diversity of all of the flowers. A lot of them have adapted to look like an insect or attract a certain insect. And the reason for that is so that the insect will pick up the pollen and move it to another plant so that they can create the seed. Orchids make hundreds, if not thousands of seeds in each of their seed pods, and then they're dispersed throughout the atmosphere. One interesting orchid is vanilla. You may not know that vanilla is actually an orchid. And the great big pod that you see, the vanilla pod, that's the seed pod for the vanilla. And these are the most common popular orchids. So right here we have dendrobium. This is very popular in Hawaii, often used for leis and to decorate your plates when you eat out. Oncidium orchids, often referred to as dancing ladies. These you'll find in nurseries, and they're good for home collectors. Cymbidium orchids. This was the Easter orchid, or often called the boat orchid. And Phalaenopsis. This is the common houseplant moth orchid. And then epidendrums. A lot of epidendrums are used in landscape, and they come in many different colors, and their common name is a reed stem orchid. So a little bit about orchid basic flower anatomy, so you'll be able to recognize. The term zygomorphic means that they have a bilateral symmetry. So if you take any orchid flower and draw a line right down the center of it, it's a complete mirror image on either side. That's one clue that you've got an orchid. Okay, another thing is they also have 3 sepals, here, here, and here, and 2 petals. Every orchid has the same of that. And then they have a big lip, and the pollination area is right in here, in the stigma and the anther. But the pollen is kept in here, and it's collected on the pollinia, and it has like sticky pads. So when the insect goes in there, he picks up the pollen, and it gets stuck to the back of like the bee or butterfly or hummingbird or whatever. It gets stuck to the back of his body, and when he goes into the next flower, it gets deposited right into a spot down in here, and that will fertilize the flower. Once the flower is fertilized, It usually will die within a few days because then the ovary starts to swell and it starts to grow and create its seed. I remember many years ago when my son, who's now almost 48, 49, when he was in junior high school, I taught him how to pollinate Cymbidium orchids. How I was showing him how the pollen comes off and showing him how sticky it is and where you put it. He thought that was the coolest thing. And one day when he was walking home from school with his friends, they went into the grocery store. It happened to be at Easter time, where they had Cymbidium corsages in the grocery store. You could buy back in the old day, you could just buy a Cymbidium corsage. And he opened up all the boxes and was showing his friends how to pollinate all the Cymbidiums. And I thought, oh my gosh, those flowers are going to die within a couple of days. He goes, yeah, but they thought that was really cool. So there's two types of growth habits for orchids, sympodial and monopodial. Let's look at the monopodials. And this is the growth habit of your Phalaenopsis. They have a single stem. All the new leaves emerge out of the top. The flowers emerge out of a leaf axil, and roots will also come out of that way. So they continually grow linear and grow up. Vandas and Phalaenopsis grow that way. Over here, I have a Vanda. This particular Vanda in the greenhouse is about 4 feet tall. So I've had it a long time, and it just keeps putting out new leaves and getting taller and taller and lanky, and you have to stake it because it wants to fall over. They will also make kikis or babies along the way, and then those can be harvested and propagated. Sympodial orchids tend to grow linear. It's almost like a tree trunk that fell over and then branches start to grow. So this would be your oldest pseudobulb here or here. You can see here, this is old. It's already lost its leaves. It's not flowered. And it put out a new growth, which was this growth, and then the next growth, and then it just keeps on growing. And here we have a growth that's got buds on it, ready to flower, and a new rhizome getting ready to start growing as well. So it grows out linearly. When you repot those, then you put your oldest bulb against the edge of the pot so it has room to grow because it's going to grow in one line. So here you can see over here an orchid here in the greenhouse. These are the older bulbs that have bloomed out already. The growth went that way, put up a bulb. Here I've got another bulb coming out, and this is the one that's going to bloom next. So it's very normal for the roots to be growing out of the pots. So roots are one of the most important things for having a successful growing orchid, but roots need air. So they need a lot of air. As I showed you earlier, they're growing up epiphytically on trees where they're exposed to a lot of air. The roots are always constantly getting a nice breeze of air through them. So if your root has this yellow-green coloration, that's the new growth. That means it's looking for water. It usually grows in the direction of water. And here we have another Vanda here with a new root. Here's an older root, and the older roots will eventually dry, but then it will put out new roots when it's seeking water. But air is really important and necessary for good root growth. The roots will grow out of the pots, and they will attach to any hard surface along the side of the pot, or you can mount them on cork or sticks, and they will eventually wrap around the sticks or the pot, or on the cork itself. So it's normal to have all your roots growing out, and here you can see healthy new roots looking for a place to go. The old bulbs, pseudobulbs, don't put out roots. I mean, they had roots, but they're dried up now. In the direction that it's growing, that's where the new growth will put out new roots. So a little bit of basic parts of the important key points for orchid culture. So these 6 items, if you can master these 6, you can grow any orchid. It's not as difficult and scary as it might seem. So water temperature, fertilizer light, air movement, and humidity. So with water, you want to water your plants, but you want to respect the season and the species that you have. So the season, obviously, spring, everything wakes up and starts to grow. In the summer, you get good growth. In the fall, it starts to slow down a little. So you water more in the spring and the summer, decrease it a little in the fall, and very little in the winter. A lot of plants in the winter will just sort of rest. They don't really do anything, so you don't really have to water them that much. In fact, they say when in doubt, don't water, and that's because most people kill their orchids by overwatering. But when you do water, you want to water thoroughly. You don't want to give it a little spritz. You want to really, really drench it. A lot of these plants come from tropical rainforest areas where they're used to getting maybe 6 months of rain and 6 months of drought. So they can handle a period of drought, but when they're watered, they get drenched. And drenching your plant is really good. You want to let the water run through the pot, through whatever medium it's growing in. You want to drench it and flush it with a good amount of pressure. That pressure will help leach out any fertilizers or salts from previous waterings. And with a little pressure, it also helps force air in behind it. And that's the key, is you want air to be able to get to the roots. You want to allow your pot to drain. You don't want it sitting in water. If it sits in water, then it will tend to rot. And how do you judge when it's time to water? In everybody's home or environment, it's going to be a little bit different. So you can usually judge by the weight of the plant. So once you take it home and you water it really good, just pick it up and feel how heavy it is. When it starts to lose its moisture content, it will be much lighter, and you'll notice a difference. If it's got bark or moss in it, you can touch that, and if that starts to feel dry, then you know it may be time to water it as well. Plants that are in bark can be watered as often as once a week. Plants that are in moss, maybe every 2 to 3 weeks. And then again, also, if it's in your house, you have to respect, are you running the air conditioner all summer? Are you running the heat? Those things will help dry out the air and also take moisture out of your plant. So those will also play a point in determining when to water. And if you do have pseudobulbs, like I showed you earlier, the sympodial growth that grows laterally, those plants with pseudobulbs, if they're full and hydrated, they're holding more water. When they start to get shriveled up, then they're losing their water. And those plants can be watered a little less frequently. If you don't have pseudobulbs, you have skinny, thin leaves and skinny roots, that's going to require needing more water more frequently. So even without knowing the species, just looking at the plant type, you can kind of figure out how often you should water it. Here's some examples of healthy hydrated plants. You have crisp green leaves, shiny, healthy, active roots. And once it comes into bloom, you get a nice, colorful, upright flowers. So basic light. All orchids require light, a bright indirect light. And like I showed you, up in the canopy, on the trees, in rocks, they're getting quite a bit of sunlight, whether or not you realize it. Typically, light green leaves are better than dark green leaves, because if the leaves are just slightly yellow-green, that means they're getting sufficient light. Without sufficient light, they're not going to bloom. People will often tell me, I've had this cymbidium, I bought it in bloom, and now it's not blooming. Well, what color are the leaves? Well, they're pretty dark. Where are you growing it? I'm growing it in the shade. Well, you need to move that into more light. It needs to be moved into more light, because light is a trigger for blooming. Not direct sunlight. Too much sun can also sunburn. You'll get sunburn spots. But here on the left, you see how the plant is slightly yellow-green, but it's in bloom. Over here, it's a little floppy and kind of dark green. It's going to take a lot longer to get that plant to bloom. And then basic humidity, 40 to 70%. Along the coast, our humidity is pretty good for growing outside. Inside your house, you have to do some modifications, again, because you're running the air conditioner or you're running the heat, and those are things that will dry out the humidity around the plant. So to increase the humidity, a simple way is you can take like a pie tin or a flat plate and put little pebbles on it, and then fill that with water, and then set the pot on top of the pebbles. The water will then rise up and create natural humidity around the plant without the plant actually sitting in water and rotting. And so the plants will like something like that. Again, good airflow. I mentioned earlier, airflow is really, really important, not only for good root growth, but also for preventing pests. I talked earlier about the 3 types of plants, depending on where they're growing and where they're found in habitat. They're split into cool, intermediate, and warm. Most of what you're going to be growing in our area will fit the intermediate. So you can see the temperatures are perfect. This is kind of what we have in our environment. So for most intermediate plants, you should be able to grow them here in San Diego. Fertilize. You don't have to fertilize, but the plants, orchids grow really slow. They're going to grow better if you do fertilize, and they're going to bloom better if you do fertilize. You can use any type of orchid food that's out there in your Home Depots or wherever. And the best recommendation is to do it weekly, but do it real weak. So you can use a balanced fertilizer, 20-10-20, 20-10-20-20, at 1/4 to 1/2 the recommended strength that's on the bag. So you want a weak dose and do it weekly. And then adjust by season. You don't need to fertilize in the winter because they're not growing. So you want to start fertilizing in spring when the plants wake up and are starting to grow. You may want to increase the strength during the summer when they're really growing, and then decrease the strength late summer, early fall, and then stop fertilizing. Again, you don't have to fertilize. They'll just grow a lot faster and better if you do. And then your potting media. What do you grow them in? Those, I brought two that I will discuss what they're growing in at the end. But there's different medias that you can get. Lava rock is a good one, especially if you like to water a lot, because it creates lots of airspace amongst the roots. You can pour a ton of water in it, probably every day, and you won't over wet your plant. Fir bark is a good one. With fir bark, you'll probably want to rewater once every 7 to 10 days, and then some of these other components. But the key is to not have a dense mix that the roots are in, because if it's too dense, stays too wet, then the roots will rot. You really want something that will allow for air movement to get through the pot. And then you want to repot them about at least every 2 years. So because the mixture that they're growing in will start to accumulate salts from the fertilizer and salts from our tap water, and those things will accumulate, and those can also burn the roots. A good way to prevent that is maybe once a month or once every 6 weeks, just really, really drench the pot with something like reverse osmosis water or some kind of pure water, and that will help pull out the salts that have accumulated in there, and the roots will be much, much happier. Okay, the most common pests for orchids are mealybug and scale. I'm sure many of you have seen those. They will happen and develop, especially if your collection is crowded together and you don't have enough air movement. The easy way to get rid of mealybug is you can just spray them with a hose with a lot of high pressure and just blow them away, and then give your plant more air, and hopefully they won't start accumulating in there. A safe way is you can use a horticultural oil to spray the scales. And the spider mites over here, I don't know if you can see in this image, but there's webbing here, and that's usually the telltale that you've got spider mites, because spider mites are so tiny that you can almost not see them. But if you see a bunch of webbing, you probably have spider mites. Spider mites often come around when the plants are a little bit too dry, your environment's too dry. So adding a little more moisture will help prevent spider mites. So how do you get them to rebloom? The key is a correct amount of light. Light is really, really important for plants to bloom. Fertilizing, especially during the growing season, will really help. The plants will perk up. And then oftentimes the plants need a cue from the environment, because these are plants that grow in nature, and so they listen to the environment. They know when the seasons are shorter, and so shorter daylight hours will trigger them to say, oh, I need to start sending out a flower and blooming. And another cue would be cooler nighttime temperatures. So if your plants are in your house all the time, the temperature's the same all the time. You may want to rotate the plants outside. I always tell people it's always best to give your plants a vacation and let them sit outside for a month or 6 weeks. And so have a couple of plants so you can rotate them so they can get used to the normal environment that's around them. And lastly, I'd like to say the biggest place that you can visit is the American Orchid Society at the aos.org. They have a fabulous website with, let's see if I don't know if this will work. I don't know if there's a web here. They have plenty of orchid basic care sheets, hundreds of webinars on how to grow orchids. So you can certainly learn a lot by visiting the AOS website. You don't even have to be a member. Okay, let's try this again. Okay, here we go. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about tillandsias. Tillandsias are also considered air plants. In fact, that's really the most popular term when someone mentions air plant, they're really referring to tillandsias. But the term air plant was originally used by a botanist way back in the late 1800s exploring Guatemala, and he said, wow, all of these orchids, they're just like air plants. And that was the first time I came across reading that term. But now today it's mainly used for tillandsias. So what are tillandsias? Tillandsias are members of the Bromeliad family. Bromeliad family is the same family as the pineapple. So you all know what that is. It's the only one that we eat. And tillandsia is a genus within the family. The tillandsias are only indigenous to the New World. So there's about a dozen species in the southern part of the United States, Florida, Georgia, Texas, but most of them are found in Mexico, Central South America, and a few species in the Caribbean. So they're New World plants, and they're only 65 million years old. So they are actually the newest plant species. So I said orchids were 150 million, and orchids were around with dinosaurs and cycads. Well, tillandsia started appearing 65 million years ago. So they are the most evolved and the newest on the whole plant spectrum. They're very different in size and shape. They range from a half-inch size to several feet. But the nice thing about them is their blooms are very colorful and they're longer lived than orchids. A lot of orchid flowers don't last that long. Some tillandsia blooms can last 8, 10, 12 months in bloom. So the highest area of diversity is in the Andes, along the Ecuador, Peru, and in the eastern part of Brazil. So the majority of tillandsias are epiphytes. They're the ones that grow in the trees. There's only about 2 to 3% that are actually terrestrial. There's about 800 species, which is not that many compared to 30,000 orchid species. And there are hundreds of hybrids. The majority are epiphytic, and they range anywhere from sea level to 8,000 foot elevation. I've seen some tillandsia species growing on pine trees at 8,000 foot elevation with snow in them, so some of them can tolerate lower temperatures. Here's an example of how they grow, but they grow densely on their trees, the masses. Some will grow on rocks. In fact, this particular one here, this is one of the plants that I found in the early 80s. And in 1985, it was published as a new species, and it was named after me. This is Tillandsia Pamela. So I was thinking earlier that, gee, there's only 800 species of tillandsias, and I have found about a dozen of them, so that's not too bad. Some species grow on the ground. They're not really terrestrial. This is in western Peru, where the whole west coast of Peru, north of Lima up to Chiclayo, there is a real wide belt of desert sand. This area gets almost no water for 10 months out of the year, and then it'll get a little bit of water. These plants lay on the sand, and they have a creeping habit where they will bloom and then put out an inflorescence on the bloom and then a new plant, and they grow towards the Pacific Ocean, and then they can gather their moisture out of the atmosphere from the ocean. They're not actually rooted in the sand, though. They're just sitting there on top of it. And these are all mounds of the same plants here, and as far as you can see, all along these major sand dunes. So they have a very unusual growth habit. So tillandsias have something that orchids don't have, and it's called trichomes. Trichomes is an adaptation that tillandsias have developed in order for them to gather more moisture out of their atmosphere. So if you can see here, this is a tillandsia tectorum, and the tectorum species have the longest trichomes on their leaves. It looks like there's little hairs on the sides of these leaves here. Those are the trichomes. They're little appendages. And what the plant has done is created it and developed these appendages to increase its surface area so it can gather more moisture out of the atmosphere. It's quite clever. It also reflects the sunlight. They're white and it will reflect the bright light. So a lot of these grow in areas where the UV light is really bright, and this reflects the light and protects the leaf tissue from burning. So here you can see Tectorum. This is their natural habitat. Here I am sitting on top of a rock here in Ecuador, and in this habitat, it doesn't rain at all. This valley, though, does connect a couple hundred miles down to the Pacific Ocean. Every night, dense fog will come in from the ocean and fill this valley. So these plants have developed these large trichomes to gather as much, like a sponge, to gather as much moisture as it can out of the atmosphere to make it able to survive and tolerate that harsh environment. You can see they're growing with cactus, so it's pretty hot and dry there. Just as I said, orchids are separated into cool, intermediate, and warm species. Tillandsias are separated into mesic, intermediate, and xeric. Mesic species are ones that love water. Mesic means water loving. So these usually grow at higher elevations, cloud forest plants. You can tell that they don't have to work to get their water. They have thin leaves. There's no water storing capability here. And so that means that in its environment, it's getting a lot of water. And again, in the cloud forest will be densely covered in fog from late afternoon till early morning hours. These plants will be dripping wet. They don't have to store water because it's readily available for them. So when you see a plant that has thin leaves like that, you know you have to give it more water because it can't store the water, as well as fertilizer. And then intermediate species tend to have more trichomes, not as many as the Tectorums, but the leaves are thicker and leathery, and they have a larger capacity to store water in their leaf tissue, so they don't have to work as hard. These are plants that come from those environments where you get 6 months of rain and 6 months of dry, so they can tolerate 6 months without water, and then when the rains start, they perk up and really start to grow. And then there's the xeric species, which usually grows at lower elevations in really hot, dry areas, and they can tolerate a lot of sun and longer periods without water. So we divide them into those three categories: water-loving, intermediate, and dry. So tillandsias typically appreciate 2,000 to 5,000 foot candles. That's like filtered shade to medium shade. Ideal temperature is 40 to 90. I did tell you, though, I did see some plants with snow. Some can tolerate above 100, but this is the safe degrees and temperatures. And you can propagate them by offsets. It usually takes 2 to 3 years. Now, one thing, the orchids, especially the monopedial orchids, the Phalaenopsis, they will continue to bloom year after year. The sympodials, the ones that grow the rhizomes, they'll bloom year after year, but it's often new growth. With the tillandsias, it's the same thing. The plant will bloom once in its life, and then it makes a baby, and the baby will grow to maturity within 2 to 3 years, and that will bloom. And then it will make babies. So the original plant eventually will die, but I say it doesn't die until it becomes a great-grandmother. And by then, you have established a clump about this size. So to grow your tillandsias successfully, airflow is really extremely important. You can't give them too much air. If you think about them growing on rock walls, mountains, in the Andes, there's plenty of air. If you ever go there, there's plenty of air movement, lots of air. In the canopies, in the trees, lots of air movement. That's really a key that's really important. The mesic species, the ones that are at higher elevations in the cloud forest, they really want pure, good water because cloud forest water is pure. There's hardly any salts in it. Our tap water here in Southern California, we monitor it at the nursery, and it's not that bad right now. In fact, it's actually better than it's been in years. It's at 475 parts per million of total salts. It has been as high as 800 parts per million, which is really bad. At the nursery, we have a reverse osmosis unit, which will give us pure water. But because we're creating water and wasting some water, we monitor the tap water so we can adjust and sometimes just use tap water when it's clean enough. When you water them, you want to water them well. One of the things that is misrepresented about air plants is that you just need to lightly mist them. That's not true, because lightly misting, that water that you mist on it will evaporate before the plant has a chance to absorb it. So you want the leaves to be wet for 20, 30 minutes, 40 minutes at a time so that they're wet enough so that those trichomes on the leaves, even if you can't see them, will absorb the water, bring it into the leaf tissue. But if it's a light misting, it evaporates before the plant can really get the water. So, and then fertilizing, we use even less fertilizer strength than on our bromeliads and tillandsias than we do on orchids. So a quarter to one eighth to 1/4 recommended strength. Again, you don't have to fertilize, but everything will grow a little bit better if you do fertilize. It's kind of like us. We grow better if we eat well and eat nutritious food. They tend to like to clump and hang. So how do you display them? You can hang them and just let them continue to grow and clump out. And then just spray them with water. You can put them on your trees as decorations, and they will make pups and grow around the branches and treat you to blooms every year. I have a friend who makes these wall frames and uses these in his garden and puts tons of different tillandsias on them, which is kind of nice. You just spray it with the hose. It gives it plenty of water, and it's a real attractive, easy way to take care of them. And you can make smaller frames in any size or shape that you want and be creative with that. You can use chicken wire and wood and just create a wood frame and put your plants on those. So the Bromeliad Society International is a great source for information, just like I had mentioned that the American Orchid Society. The BSI.org as well has cultural information, so you should go to their website. About 10 years ago, I developed an app. I call it Air Plant Tilly Cards, and it has some basic information about tillandsias and how to take care of them. So in its color-coded, here you see the 3 colors. The blue ones are the mesic, cloud forest ones. Green is intermediate, and the brown band would be xeric, drier-loving plants. So let's see if this is going to work. There's a plant list, and then you can choose a plant. You flip the plant. There's a simple glossary. There's the color key codes. And then you flip the card over and you get some basic information about the plant. I tell you the elevation where it grows, which should help you figure out how to grow it, what states it's in, some of the basic requirements. There's a search. You can search by country. You can search by hybridizer. You can search by publisher. You can even star your favorites or star ones that you're looking for. And then it's just simple guidelines on how to take care of the plants. So in closing, I'm going to say that tillandsias are really versatile. There's many different colors, sizes, and shapes. Too many to talk about, even though there's only 800 species, but thousands of hybrids. A friend of mine took his and mounted each one on a piece of cork and then attached the cork to his jacaranda tree, and it really made a nice display in his garden. The plants were up in the environment where they were getting plenty of air. Just hit them with the hose. They do fine in the winter. You don't have to do anything else. And so with that, I would like to thank you, and I'm going to discuss the plants that I brought for demonstration. And you're also invited anytime to come visit the nursery in Encinitas, Bird Rock Tropicals. You can visit our website for an appointment. We do garden club tours and to visit the nursery as well. So let me first talk about the 2 Phalaenopsis that I brought in. And if you have any questions, I guess you want to wait for the questions till after. I used to grow a lot of Phalaenopsis. I no longer grow Phalaenopsis. I stopped growing Phalaenopsis about 25 years ago when they allowed imports from China to come in. And at that time, you get a plant fully leafed out in bud with a stem this high for $2. So I can no longer grow them in the nursery and be profitable. So this is what you have available in your local nurseries. So I went out to see what is available, and this one is from Home Depot, and this is from Gelson's. And actually, this is a really nice one. But let me show you how they do this. These, again, monopodial Phalaenopsis. They're a little greener than they should be, but they just came out of a nursery where they overfeed them, so everything is green. They also grow these in these clear pots, so you can see and monitor the roots. So this one is growing in straight bark, and I watered it thoroughly yesterday, so you shouldn't have to water it again for another 2 weeks. But you can tell it's got weight to it. But with the bark, that allows the air to come through, but you don't want to keep it wet. And then you can start to see, do I still have good root growth? If I don't have good root growth, I have too much root growth, then maybe it's time to repot. This one, also in a plastic pot. This is just a decorative moss that they have on top, but they're growing it in, it looks like New Zealand moss down here. New Zealand moss is a little lighter color. New Zealand moss is really a great product to grow in, but you kind of need to have good water with New Zealand moss, because New Zealand moss will accumulate all the salts from our tap water and your fertilizer and eventually poison the plants. But plants grew really fast. We do a lot of our work is in New Zealand moss a long time ago. So it's in moss, so it's not going to dry out as quickly as this one. So this one will only need to be rewatered when it starts to feel light. You'll wait to it, and you can put your finger in there and realize that the moss is actually dry. Then you take it to the sink and you drench it and flood it and really gush the water through, because you want to pull out any accumulated salts or fertilizer, and then let it sit there and drain. You don't want to put it back in the pot, because all that water will accumulate in the pot, and then you'll have a plant sitting in water, and then your roots will start to rot. But this is a real nice plant, and it's got some buds still coming. So this will probably stay in bloom for maybe a couple more months. When it's done blooming, the flowers will start to fade. And what you do is you can cut them off at the bottom, but oftentimes if you cut them at the second internode, so there's like a little scar tissue here and here and here, kind of above the second internode, oftentimes the plant will, within 2 to 3 months, respike off one of those nodes and send out a lateral shoot. If you cut it down at the bottom, it may take another year before it respikes. So that's basic phalaenopsis. All right, so now I'm going to show you, a lot of people don't realize that phalaenopsis can get big. So this is a species from Jalisco, Mexico, as it's called, Jalisco monticola. So, Tillandsia Jalisco monticola. It's found in the state of Jalisco, west coast of Mexico. This is the inflorescence. From the time the spike starts to come up till it's completely done is about 8 months. It will hold color for another 8 months. So it stays in bloom for a long time. You can really appreciate it as opposed to the orchids, which go out of bloom more frequently. It's going to make babies at the base. And those babies, when they get to be half size of the mother, you can cut those off and propagate from that. Usually the babies, when you cut them off and replant them, they'll grow to maturity and rebloom within 2 to 3 years. If you're growing from seed, which I grew a lot of plants from seed, you have to hand pollinate the plant, and it can take up to 2 years for the seed to be ready to harvest. So if you're making a hybrid, you've got to remember what you put on there because it's going to be a while. Then you plant the seed and spread it out, and then that can take anywhere from 8 to 20 years for the plant to bloom. So it's a long process. Okay, so there's 3 plants. And then I did bring a sample of smaller tillandsias, just mainly to show you the diversity of shapes and sizes. So this is a Tillandsia streptophylla. I had shown you a picture of it in blue, but it's got this nice ball shape. And you can see it does have some trichomes on it. It's a thicker leaf, so it's going to hold more water. This is actually a hybrid with this is one of the parents. So you can see where it got the curly stuff from. It's called Curly Slim. And here we have 2 interesting plants. Both of these are pretty green and blah looking until they come into bloom. Then they turn this bright red color and they'll put out purple flowers. And that will last for 6 to 8 weeks. And then again, it's going to make puffs at the base, and then you can regrow it from that. This one's in spike, and it has purple flowers which will be fragrant. This is a xeric one, Xerografica. I'm sure you're familiar with that. I brought in 2 little ones, which are both fragrant. They're really nice. But they're little tiny, but you can see they have more trichomes, so they come from an environment where they're getting a lot of light. It's a little drier, so they have to work to gather that water. And then they're so small that they have this great scent in order to attract any insects in the environment. So I can pass those around if you want to smell it. Okay, and then I did bring 2 examples of the Tectorum, the ones that have the longer trichomes, so you can see what those look like. And then I brought just a couple of small ones. This is an interesting one. It's called Chiapensis. It grows in Chiapas, Mexico. The bloom spike will come up a little higher, and it will stay in bloom again for about 8 months. And it grows on rock walls above Rio Grijalva, and it gets really hot there. But again, it's got the trichomes to gather the moisture out of the atmosphere from the river humidity. So I brought this to show you how you can attach it to cork. Here we have, this is the active blooming plant. This is the Tillandsia ionantha. These are normally green until they come into bloom, then they turn bright red and put out purple flowers. They'll hold their color for about 3 months, then they'll fade back to green. When they're done blooming, then they make a baby. So here's an older one, the mother, who's now fading. She's still alive. She's got a baby there. The baby's getting ready to get bigger. And actually, right in here would be your great-grandmother, who's now passed away. So once they've created their 2nd or 3rd generation, the leaves will tend to die back and shrivel up. And you can pull those leaves out, but you have all these other plants that have been growing.
Did she get a proper funeral?
What?
Did she get a proper funeral?
So I think, and then I brought a few other different ones to see. So let's see, did you have any questions?
Yeah.
Hey, Pam?
Yes.
Yeah, we have one submitted question so far, and then if anybody has any other questions, just raise your hand and I'll walk to you with the microphone. But the submitted question was, I raised cymbidiums, and I have noticed they seem to bloom later in the year than they used to. What might this be due to?
This is climate change. This is probably a result of climate change. And also, we had a pretty mild summer this year, but I've noticed that in habitat, because I do a lot of field work, and plants in habitat are blooming later than they used to. So I've noticed 2 things in habitat. Number one, the blooming cycles are off. So with the Tillandsias, they grow on the trees. You might have 4 or 5 different varieties within a certain couple 100 feet elevation. And typically, 30 years ago, when I first started, or 40 years ago, you would see 1 species in bloom. And then now I will see 2 or 3 different species in bloom because of the difference of climate. Their blooming cycles are off. There's also, because of habitat destruction, there's a lot more competition for pollen amongst the epiphytes than there ever used to be. And so now I'm also seeing lots of natural hybrids where we didn't see that before. So with the blooming cycles off and the pollinators all starving for pollen, they're pollinating everything, and we're seeing a lot of natural hybrids in habitat. So your cymbidium blooming later is probably because of climate change, or if you have a mild weather. Because, like I said, they respond to temperature and cooler nights and cooler, shorter days. It's usually the trigger.
Anybody?
I have a beautiful bromeliad,
Uh-huh.
and I've heard to water it through the flowers and also through the soil. And I just wanted to comment about that.
Yeah. Is it like a vase type with upright, large pot? Uh-huh. And then the leaves grow upright? Yeah, okay, so that's correct. You want to take and water the center of the plant and flood it so that you're completely exchanging any existing water and any little pests and critters and dirt and grime that have accumulated in there. Flood it out so it goes into the soil, and you just keep flooding till you drench that soil and leach out the soil. And that should be fine. You don't necessarily need to water the flower itself, no. I mean, you can spray it, but you don't need to.
You want it to dry out?
You want it to dry out in between. Both orchids and bromeliads, you want the pots to go dry in between water. If they're too wet, it damages the roots, and then you're not and we'll be happy. Yes,
How do you care these?
which one? These air plants?
Yes, if you have them in a bowl at home.
If you have them in a bowl at home, so you're in the house, so you either have heat or air conditioning on, so that you have to determine if it's drying or not. Some of the plants will tell you when they need water because the leaves are broad, and when they start to need water, they'll curl in a little bit. So if you become more concave, that's when you need water. At that point, put it in the sink, immerse it in with water, let it set for an hour, maybe 2 hours, take it out, and then you're gonna see it really plump. Shake it out and then just leave it in the house. So I recommend not watering, watering maybe, you can get away with once a month. Oh, or once every 6 weeks. Most people kill, I have some at my guest house that I water about 3 times a year. And it's still alive and it's been there about 5 or 6 weeks. And it's a clump of leaves.
And it doesn't like the sun.
They don't, not direct sun, indirect sun. In the house, you don't want direct sun through the window because that magnifies it for your leaves. But you want it fairly bright. It's good to get a couple of them, put some outside for a couple of months and rotate them. That's really the best. Your plants will be happy just that way. And if it's raining, put them all outside and let them get the rain on.
Any other questions?
Pam, would you please show us the Samantha Talancia and tell us her award-winning story?
Let's see, there is one hybrid I made. Let's see. Okay, here's not a great picture. Let's. All right, so that's not a great picture, but this is one of the hybrids that I made. It's a cross of 2 different plants from 2 different areas of Oaxaca. I created the plant, and in 2013, I had the Grex in bloom. A Grex is all the seedlings from the cross, and they were on a bench. And most of them look like this, not all of them. Some were a little wonky, some were straighter and better. And there was a Belgium grower who would come to visit me all the time because he knew I did hybridizing. And he asked me if he could take one back to Belgium and try it in tissue culture. This was new because they had never tried Tillandsias in tissue culture because everyone always thought of Tillandsias as air plants. And actually at that time, I was really one of the first people to really start growing Tillandsias in pots, just like I do with this Jalisca monticola. The reason I started growing in pots is because I would observe that the plants are on these trees. The seed's been sitting there for about 20 years. And during that 20 years, there's a lot of debris and mulch and dirt that has accumulated at the base of the plant that the roots are growing in. It's kind of like growing in its own pot. So when I started growing a lot of these bigger plants, I put them in the pots, and we use a mix of peat moss and bark to allow for drainage and yet maintain some moisture. So anyways, he was looking at the Grex. He says, can I take a couple back to Belgium and try them in tissue culture? At that time, they're only tissue culturing Acmeas, Guzmanias, the colorful Bromeliads you see in all the grocery stores. Those were in mass production. So he took it back, and then that was in 2003. He got it into culture, and then in 2010, he started releasing it to nurseries in Europe as trials of, sorry about that, for growers to test. And then in 2012, it was entered at the Chelsea Flower Show, and it made the top 10 plants of the show. And so the queen actually walked by my plant. And then in 2013, one of the bigger growers that was producing my plant was entered it in Flora Holland. Flora Holland is the flower auction in Ellesmere in the Netherlands. And they do something called the yeah, thank you. They do a glass tulip award every year in 5 different categories. So my plant was nominated for the category of house plant, and it was a new, unusual, completely different, and it actually won the glass tulip. So that's kind of like winning an Oscar. It's a big deal. And then years later, when I went to visit the grower who had entered it, he had the actual award and certificate, and it, you know, it's for Bird Rock Tropicals because we were the producers, and he gave it to me. So I now have the trophy in my office. So that's that. Thank you. How did I become interested in? Oh,
My question was going to be, how did you get started doing this?
okay, very good. Great minds think alike, right? So I started in 1981. I was a registered nurse at the time. I worked in the ICU, and I was on vacation in Mexico, and I went hiking and found this really unusual plant that looked a little bit like this, but it was a caput medusa, so it was a long, bulbous, strappy thing. And I thought, that's really strange. It was growing on a rock wall next to a waterfall, and I thought, how unusual is that? So I came back and thought, well, I want to learn something about these. There was not a lot written about them, but the monograph, which is a scientific publication put out by the Smithsonian, big 3-part volume, had just been published a few years before. So I took the works with me to work at night, because I worked the ICU at night, and when my patients were sleeping, I went through this book, and I made another notebook, and I itemized all the plant species growing in the notebook was divided by states of Mexico. So I listed every plant that had been found in any state of Mexico and near whatever locality it was. Then about a year later, I started traveling to Mexico, and I would go anywhere from 2 weeks to 6 months at a time, just driving around every back road, every valley, and I'd go, oh, I'm in Michoacan. I'm in this town of Zacuapan. Let's see, I should find these 5 species. I'd collect plants in the daytime, and then at nighttime, I would go through the plant descriptions and figure out what I had. So after doing that for many, many years, I eventually, in fact, this is a particular plant. I discovered this plant, which is actually a natural, I think it's a natural hybrid. And I would start to send my works to botanists at Selby Garden or in Heidelberg, where some of the authorities were. But someone else had found it, a German had found this plant around the same time that I found it. And so they ended up naming it after her. So this is Tillandsia ehlersiana. So that's how I eventually found plants that I thought were new to science. They turned out to be new to science. They were published by others. A few of them are published by me. I found some natural hybrids. And also, seeing plants in habitat is such an education. I can still remember some of these plants from the very first time I saw them. I can feel the environment and know what their plant needs are, and then I can replicate that. So then I started a backyard nursery in the Bird Rock area of La Jolla from 81 till 83. Then I leased 10,000 square feet at Gunpowder Point at the west end of E Street in Chula Vista for 2 years. Then in 85, I moved up to Carlsbad and leased, I was occupying 2 acres of 7 acres I was leasing, and started growing bromeliads and orchids there. And then when I closed that nursery in 2005 and moved it to Encinitas, I actually am about a quarter of the size I was. So I'm a lot smaller. I was supposed to be trying to go into retirement. I don't think that's happening anytime soon. You know where Cordova Gardens is? Off Encinitas Boulevard. That's Encinitas Boulevard and Prince House Lane. We're at the end of Prince House Lane. Nobody knows we're there. It's a secret street. There's 7 properties. It's a dead end, but that's where I am. Yes.
So when you walk the farms,
Mm-hmm.
are you tempted to want to beautify it even more with your skills?
No.
Could you?
They don't want bromeliads and orchids at the farms.
Why not? Yeah.
They could have one area. What they need is a cork oak tree. That's what
Well,
they
some
need.
of the trees could have some.
And then we could put them all on the trees. You can attach them by several ways. You can wire them on. If you're going to wire them, you can use monofilament. You can use a wire that's coated with plastic. You don't want to do it too tight, but you want it tight enough. Because if the plant is wobbly, it won't put out roots and it won't stay on and establish. Or like my friend did, he attached the plants to a piece of cork, just like this. And then he took all these different pieces of cork, and he actually nailed the cork to his jacaranda tree. Didn't hurt the tree, and that was one way to do it. You can also use the colored aluminum wire and hang them up, or you can tie, you can just take this and tie it with monofilament and hang it up. I had showed you pictures earlier of big balls and clumps. If you ever come to the nursery, we have hundreds of big clumps that have been growing for 30 or 40 years.
I have a Phalaenopsis.
Okay.
It's been going since May, and my question is, the instructions were to submerge it once a week and completely dry it.
Mm-hmm.
And the Phalaenopsis I had before this one, it said use 2 ice cubes once a week. What is a better way to water, submerging
Well,
or
the
ice cubes?
the theory of the ice cubes is that you're giving it a little bit of water that will trickle down. So that's not really an idea. The thing with the Phalaenopsis is, I think I forgot to mention, the monocotyl orchids that grow like this and put out new leaves and new leaves, you don't want to let the water sit in a cramp. So you can water it from above, rinse the leaves and drench it, but then when you're done, turn it over and get the water out of the cramp.
Yeah.
It sits there and rot. So again, you need to look at what your plant is potted in. If it's in bark, take it to the sink once every 2 weeks or so and drench it, let it drain, and then put it back. If
Great.
it's in moss like this one, you can go a lot further. You judge by the weight of the pot, because when the pot's dry, it won't have much weight to it. Or you can judge by touching the bark or the moss. If it still feels moist, it doesn't need water.
I had some yellow leaves. Is that the cause of overwatering?
Probably because of overwatering. I mean, if you were doing it, if you were dunking it once a week, that's probably too much. The plant's in your house?
Yes, it's in house.
Yeah, so that's
Probably not getting enough light. We put it in the bathroom and it lasts longer.
okay. Well, the other thing about Phalaenopsis is they're great people plants because they like people conditions. They like the darkness of the house. So it doesn't really need as much light as some of the other ones. And they like the temperatures of most houses. So they're more easily adapted to growing in the house.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else?
Mm-hmm.
Hi. I have a lot of air roots on my
Orchids?
orchids.
Uh-huh.
Do you cut those or do you leave them alone? Or, I mean, I have one that is like the whole pot is surrounded by these air roots.
Right. And I think I had showed a picture of that. Let's see if I can pull that picture back up. Here. So here you can see if it's the laterally growing ones, the sympodials, as opposed to the Phalaenopsis, the ones that grow up and up and up. Is it one of those? Okay, so it's like this one on the right. Yes, and that's normal. You get a lot of roots. The lower, the older part of the plant, which would be the lower leaves, those roots will eventually dry off and die. And as the new growth comes out, it's going to put more roots out. And they will attach to any hard surface like the pot. That's all normal. That's in nature, they would be attached to a tree. So you can grow them on yeah, just leave them alone. Mm-hmm. If you have a bunch of dried ones like these down here at the bottom, those could be snipped off if you wanted to clean it up, you can. But you want to make sure you have enough active growing roots. And that's dependent on water and air. Air is really important, but water is as well, because roots always grow in the direction of moisture. So you can see here, I drench these pots, water falls down below the bench. We have gravel below that bench, so the moisture accumulates. These guys are growing down because they sense the moisture down below.
Any other questions?
I don't know if this makes any sense, but
There's one more question.
thank you. I have a dear friend who raised orchids and gave me many for gifts.
Mm-hmm.
And her secret was to put one ice cube in each plant once a week.
Mhm.
And I've had extremely good luck, but I don't know if that's enough water or if that makes sense.
Well, that's sort of the weekly thing. Usually, I think you want to be a little more proactive, involved with your plant. You want to see that the roots are growing. You want to feel the plant and make sure it's dry enough to want water. So I don't recommend that. I know a lot of people do recommend that. But if they're growing fine, I don't think it's a problem. They're a lot hardier than we think. They're more adaptable than we think. So the key is just to sort of evaluate the plant. Is it thick? Does it have thick leaves? It can go a little bit longer. Is it got thin roots and thin leaves? It needs more moisture. It probably came from the cloud forest where moisture is more abundant to it. And it's the same with the tillandsias.
Anything else? Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you again, Dara. Okay. So, yes.
We'll get ready for this.